All right. Shall we? I think we had organized to start off just by saying briefly what the scope of each journal is and the kind of papers that we publish. Um, so I'm Beth Parks, and I edit the American Journal of Physics. And I think our definition is basically what we are not, which is we don't publish introductory level papers, usually, with a few exceptions. So things that would be appropriate for high school are pretty much never appropriate for AJP. Things that are introductory level at university or college are usually should go into the physics teacher, but occasionally can go into AJP, either because there's introductory level college that just couldn't possibly be used in a high school, and then it might be more appropriate for AJP. And also sometimes there's something that really, really needs more pages to say it in. And we do allow longer papers than AJP. But we really encourage you to just say it shorter because you're going to get more readers if you can say it shorter, and then also it can go into TPT. And we do publish up to graduate level, although we kind of try to restrict those because we don't want to get into research tutorials. So it's stuff that really affects instruction. And I think that's the main thing to think about when you're thinking about what to publish is this something that's useful to other instructors? So rather than coming at it from, the authors who send me a paper because they want to publish this and they figure maybe AJP will work, those are not my favorite papers, and they often get rejected. Whereas the ones where you've really come up with something that is really helpful to you, either directly in the classroom or to help you understand something that influences your teaching, even if maybe you're not quite ever going to teach it. Those kinds of things that people will want to read as volunteers, because no one has to read AJP. We're glad that many people do, but it's not like if you don't read it, then you'll fall behind in your research. So we're looking for things that will be so compelling that people will want to read them. All right, Gary?
Yeah, so Beth pointed out that TPT is about the introductory physics classroom, wherever it might be. And we think of that fairly broadly as high school and as university and two-year colleges and middle school, perhaps, maybe even outreach that has to do with demonstrations for kids. All of that I consider to be sort of introductory physics relevance for physics teacher. Um, we are we have a benchmark length of 2,000 words for our manuscripts. So that's maybe 3 to 4 pages of typical TPT content. Um, if you make the case for a few more pages, then that happens fairly often or somewhat often. Um, but it is something to pay attention to. Beth says that you'll get more readers if you with 3 pages than you'll get with 6. That's for sure. And then uh, I think take home messages much more readily. Um, so I guess the other thing that I would say about a physics teacher is that the primary criterion for acceptance is um, is it interesting enough to interesting to introductory physics teachers, other introductory physics teachers, in the editor's opinion. So the referees are using that benchmark, whether or not it's interesting to other physics teachers. And Beth mentioned that about AJP also, but I think it's critical for TPT. And the kinds of articles that you might see include things like innovative demonstrations, new ways of doing physics lab experiments for the introductory sequence, um, ideas for presenting difficult topics more clearly, um, new technology in the classroom, ways to use it and improve your teaching, historical insights. We have a good number of those kind of papers that I think enrich the overall course. And ideas for implementing physics education research tactics into the classroom in various situations is another thing. Um, I think I'll stop there and uh, and and move to the next question.
Okay. On the subject of brevity, for both our journals, we have online supplementary material. So we really encourage the use of that for several reasons. One is, for example, if you've developed a new unit, and so you have like some worksheets or homework assignments or lab handouts or things like that, then we'll definitely ask you to share those in online supplementary material. But also, if you really got engaged in this problem and you just wanted to work out all of the little pieces of it, that's terrific. But that's a good place for online supplementary material. And also, like the details, if you have a new piece of lab equipment, then people want to know why they might want to build it, what they can do with it, what kind of results you get from it. But if they decide that they want to implement it, they want to know where you can order each piece from and how you align it and all of that kind of stuff. But those sorts of, after you've already made the decision that you're really interested in it, that information can go into online supplementary material. And then that allows you to publish a shorter paper that, again, everyone likes better and more people read. All right. Uh, I think we've said like how you would know which journal to put it into. That was the possible second question. Is there anything more about like which journal to send something to?
I'll just mention that um, if you want your journal article to be open access, then there's a fee involved. But otherwise, there's not a fee involved for TPT or for AJP. That's uh, important criteria for a lot of teachers I know.
Right. And for AJPs, some of them are not behind the paywall also, and that might be true for TPT. So as a special incentive for writing short things, the notes and letters and guest editorials and book reviews are all freely available. So they do get a lot more readers and usually more citations also. And in AJP especially, we have a I was going to say, does it sound embarrassing to say that it's a particularly low bar for letters? I don't think it really is because it's just the idea is that we want somewhere where you can share something that might be valuable, but maybe, it might not really meet the bar for being totally original, or you're just trying to like say, I developed these resources and here they are. Those kinds of things could be a letter. And so for a letter, you don't have to say that it's totally novel or that, I don't know, that we're happy to publish them. So start with that if you want to, as like a quick way to share something.
And I'll then point out that a regular article in TPT is the 2,000 word benchmark, 3 or 4 pages. But we also have something called columns. There are about 10 different kinds of columns. Um, and you can easily find them on the TPT website. But we have, like, for example, iPhysics labs. Um, we have Just Physics, which is about equity issues. We have And the Survey Says, which is about demographic information. All of these are articles that are less than 1,000 words, fit on 2 pages or less. And they have columns editors who individually do the reviewing for those, generally speaking, unless there's something particularly controversial inside of them. But the columns are a good way to get started because first it's short, abbreviated thing, and 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 because they're on a very specific topic, I feel like that you might could fit it in, and usually the time scale is quicker for the columns.
All right. There was a question about our editorial process. So how we assign reviewers, what we tell them, how we read the review reports, what happens next. Um, all right. So I'll try and explain. So at AJP, First of all, we get a lot of papers in that are totally inappropriate, and that's not going to come from this group, so I probably don't need to tell you about that except in humor. So, a lot of papers where they see that it's the American Journal of Physics and they want to share their new theory of the universe. I eliminate all of those ones and all of the ones that want to prove Einstein wrong and all of that stuff. And then, assuming it looks generally appropriate, then I either assign it to one of the associate editors or I keep it myself. And so we got a lot of really hard stuff. So we try and have an editor who's able to like read it and understand it. So I don't take any of the general relativity papers. I have a couple of other editors who are really good at that kind of stuff. Um, and so then the associate editor will read it a little bit more closely to see where would be the best place to send it for reviewers. You're welcome to suggest reviewers. The website asks you for 5 suggested reviewers, but if you look at it really closely, you'll see it's not one of the starred items, so it's not required. But if you do suggest them, we'll usually try to use some or all of them, kind of depending on the situation. And then we'll try and come up with reviewers who can give us a variety of pieces of information on it. So sometimes we really want to go to the specialists because it's clear that the paper is going to be interesting to people and we want to know if it's right. Sometimes the paper we're just not quite sure if it's going to be useful to its intended audience. So we want to make sure that we send it to the intended audience to hear about usefulness, and we only send it to a few people about whether or not it's right, because that is a lot more clear. So usually we aim for 3 reviewers, although we'll take 2 if it seems like enough. Sometimes that means sending it to 20 people. So when you get a paper from us and you say yes, we really appreciate it. Um, then usually there will be several rounds of review. In general, once you make it past the first round of review, you're most likely that it'll come up accepted. And when I don't see it's likely to be accepted after that, then I'll send a letter, a decision letter will say, well, here is why I'm really concerned about this. And if you don't want to try to resubmit, I understand, but I'll give you the option if you want to. Um, and then it will go through a couple of rounds of review until the reviewers are all happy with it. And then I try and make it clear in the letters that have come to you earlier that that is not the end of the process, because what the associate editors and I take on after that is really often it does go to specialists. And also we tell reviewers not to try to make all the wordings as elegant as possible because we'd rather save the reviewers for the important stuff, for the actual content. So we do a lot of suggestions. It's not atypical to send a paper back with over 100 comments on it, although they're usually pretty small and easy to deal with. So we'll suggest rewordings. We'll tell you how the figures need to be improved to make them publishable. We'll suggest moving things around, putting things into supplementary material. We'll say, like, this piece in the conclusion, that's really strong and not everyone's going to make it to the conclusion. Why don't you put that in the introduction? So a lot of suggestions like that. So I think most of our authors actually really like that process because it means that someone who respects your work is reading it really carefully and trying to make it as best we can. Every once in a while, someone's kind of offended by that. So I just want you to know that it's gonna happen. Even once the reviewers like it, we're still gonna try and make it better. Then eventually it gets published. So that's the AJP process as far as I can remember it. How about you, Gary?
Well, there are many similarities. In general, I'll say before you submit to TPT, there's a few things to think about. One is remember that the audience is other physics teachers in the introductory setting. And you want to try to make it as broad as possible. But if you're really only an expert in university physics teaching, introductory physics, then you really don't have much to say to high school teachers typically. But you should try to not exclude them intentionally. You should also be reading the editorial policy of the journals you want to submit to, including TPT's editorial policies. And also browse the journals. get a sense of what's in there before you submit, or review for the journal. That's also a great way to learn a little bit about the process. Um, Also, you want to look back at related work and um, write your first draft with in and show it off to a colleague and see if you can get them to weigh in on it before you submit it. So that's sort of the before. Um, the submission portal is called PXP. It's how we think of it. It's PXP, peer review system, where you submit the journal, the submissions for the articles. We have a managing editor named Ben Lefstein, and he's uh, really good at his job. And he examines the manuscripts at first to see if they have the right format, and if they have the references so sort of close to right, and also removing the author's names. So TPT and AGP both utilize doubly anonymous reviewing, so that um, you don't know who the author of the paper is, and of course the author of the paper won't know who the reviewer is. We do think that that's a little more equitable in some sense, and we've been working in that way for a good while, and so we have a lot of experience with it. But you'll need to anonymize your paper when you submit it, or at least should be easily to be anonymized. I don't usually get up to 20 reviewers before I can get 2 or 3 good reviews, but I have before. But usually it's more like 4 or 5. Um, and uh, and so you may see there that it's reviewer number 4 and reviewer number 6 who've got the substantive reviews. That means that the other ones either said no or didn't write anything that I could use, and so there's no reason to be worried about being number 4 or number 6. Let's see if I can add anything else. We do ask the reviewers to be respectful when they review, and we have a sort of a one pager that suggests what we mean by that. We don't want them to lower the bars in any sense, but we do want them to be gracious and professional about the suggestions for improvements. And we do think that people appreciate that. In fact, reviewers say that quite often. Once the reviews are in, then a decision has to be made whether it's revise and resubmit, or reject, or conditionally accept. And that's made by the editor, by me, typically. Although in terms of the columns, the column editors usually make the decision about acceptance or not. But I do review them. Let's see if there's anything else I want to add. Once you get your paper back after it's been reviewed, for TPT, it's similar to AJP in that if you make it through the first round of review, then it's usually going to be eventually accepted, but it will have several other cycles where you'll have some suggestions for improvements or changes and rearrangements. Somebody's mentioned Jane Chambers' name already, and she's the one who does the layout for TPT. And in that sense, we're a little bit different than AJP, that we have an in-house layout system, and that makes it a little bit different than AJP. I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Actually, I did see a question in the comments, and first of all, there was a question about the fee for publication, and the answer was $3,000, but we just want to make really clear that that's only for open access. So there's not a fee for regular access, and that means that people can read it if they have a subscription or if their university has a subscription, but otherwise it's not openly accessible. Although you do have permission to share it on your website, you can't share the typeset version that the journal's produced for a year, but you can, your final submitted version you can share on your website right away. In fact, even before you've submitted it, if you want to. There was also a question about which journal would be appropriate for bringing traditionally advanced content into an introductory college level course. My bet is that since you're thinking about bringing into a college level course, probably AJP would be the right journal. It depends a little bit on how advanced is the content and how hard this paper is going to be to read, and whether someone who doesn't already understand that more advanced content is going to be able to bring it into their course, or if it's really something that you're only going to want to bring in if it's something that you know more about. So if you're showing someone who does solid state physics how they can teach about superconductors in their introductory course, there's a limited audience for that, and it probably ought to go in AJP. There's also how long does the review publication process typically take from first submission to final publication? There's not a real typical there. It's not short. So in AJP, usually to get the first review reports back is at least a month, probably 2 months to get 3 review reports back. And then after that, there's some questions as to how long it takes to go back and forth. But even if you turn your end around in just a couple of days, it's still probably a month for each subsequent round. Usually there'd be at least 2 total rounds of review, but 3 is probably more common. And then after that, assuming that I'm not too swamped, then the editing process can go through in like 3 weeks or so, but it might take you a little bit more time at that point to like fix up the figures and things like that. And then there's usually about 3 months before it actually comes out in print, because there's both, I have papers already in the queue and those published first. And then once yours come up, there's still some time to like get it actually prepared and out published. So I think we might be averaging around 8 or 9 months right now. But I'm actually not sure how that average is computed, because there are certainly papers that come out that get accepted right away, like book reviews. So I think those might go into the average also. All right, Gary?
Yeah, so I'd say our average time right now is about a year. Um, and part of that has to do with a surplus of papers that have come in since COVID, and we haven't slowed down. Um, so you may notice if you get the print version of TPT that it's been thicker for the last 2 or 3 years than all the previous years before that. Um, However, columns have a faster turnaround cycle, a few months typically, if they get accepted. And so those are the very short articles I told you about that are specific to individual topics. And I think Tom had posted the names of the columns in the chat at some point, so you could look there to see if anything matches what you like to do. Yeah, so TPT is about a year from submission to publication currently.
I'm just going to toss out there that another thing I'd like is a back of the envelope editor. We had one for a while. Those were really fun columns to read, and we lost the editor. So if anyone likes that or wants to propose a different column that people would enjoy just as much, I'm all ears. So were there questions? I think that we got the questions in the chat, but I'm not sure. And so you can either vocalize a question that was in the chat or ask a new one. Go for it.
Yeah. So if we have an idea of like a potential column or something we know we want to write up, but want to get your feedback on what might be an appropriate version, like if it could be a column at TPT or a letter at AJP or something like that, would you be willing to accept emails from us of just like, here's the outline of what I'm thinking I want to write. Where is a good place to put it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Gary gets lots more of those emails than I do, but I get some. You definitely get a response. I was just typing the journal email address into the chat. And there's the same one for TPT, right? It's tpteo@aip.org, or they can just write to you.
just write to me at any of my email addresses because I don't ever look at TPTEO. I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay. All right. So you might not have that set up. So that's all
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So write to
I'm,
Gary
but
or,
I've typed my email address in here.
okay. And I was also going to add, uh, so we have separate web pages. So there's the web pages where I put my content. So that's where like the editorial policy lives and all the submission instructions. And there's a lot of words there. And to tell you the truth, it's really obvious to me that most submitters don't read them at all. But I am grateful for the people who do. And I think those submissions go a little bit more smoothly. So to the extent that you have time to read them, I encourage you to do so. Um, and then we also have a publications website. So pubs.aip.org/AAPT/PTE or/AJP. Sorry to be talking out loud. Okay, so I hope that makes sense for where you go to read the published articles. So it's AAP/AJP if you want to reach AJP. You should, if you're a member of AAPT, which I think you are because you're here, you should have free online access whether or not your university has access, and you should have access to all the archives even if your university doesn't have the full archive package. So if you don't, then it's help at aip.org. Wait, I can't type. I'm sorry. So that's the place where you send an email saying, I'm a member, I should have access. Tell me how to do it. Because it's a whole separate login process for the publications website than it is from the AAPT website. Sorry.
So
And
in
then the
regards to your
submission
question,
website is
Meredith,
a whole nother one. Go ahead, Gary.
in regards to your question, Meredith, I replied to an email today about from a contributor who wanted to write an article of a certain kind and was asking whether it was appropriate or not. And I said many of the things I've just said today in my email about, make sure that you're thinking of your audience as other physics teachers in the classroom. Um, and uh, and we've got a 2,000 word sort of benchmark length. So, um, but but yeah, by all means, send an email about question if you have questions on a particular topic or if something seems a little bit on the edge, then send me something. I was going to also say I had a question at one point about something that you might not know about the journal, and so I'm going to talk briefly about the collections. We have over the years made a number of collections, sort of topical collections in physics in the physics teacher, and the most recent one is quantum in the class introductory classroom. So it had this cover, the sort of dizzying, and it had several articles. In fact, we're still contributing articles or publishing articles in part of the collection for all spring. So we have 2 or 3 articles every month this beginning of the year 2025, and it looks at how you might introduce quantum mechanics in the classroom, introductory physics classroom. But other collections include teaching about climate change in the introductory classroom, using math and physics, which is a sequence of articles written by Joe Reddish, who recently passed away, but a really influential physics education researcher. And there's really a stellar collection of articles. Race and physics teaching in the introductory classroom, and gender and physics teaching in the introductory physics classroom are both collections with Geraldine Cochran as a co-editor. So just wanted you to know about that. And if that any of those topics sort of speak to you, then we've got them kind of grouped together in one place, all the articles. So just for you to look at on the website.
I think on my surprising fact about AJP, I mentioned that we actually have an acceptance rate that's under 15% for submitted articles. And so if you get a paper in, you can feel really good about it. And yet I also don't want to be saying that to scare you off, because for people who, like you, are actually trying to learn about the journal, submit something that's appropriate, think about your audience before you submit it. I'd say that we have a much higher acceptance rate than that, probably. You know, when I get a paper in, it's obvious that it was written for AJP. I think the acceptance rate's probably 70%. And the main problem would be either that it turns out it's really not quite right, or that it's a great idea, but it's been published before.
I see a question in the chat about asking, are these repeated topical collections? And I would say we haven't repeated any of them yet intentionally. And
We haven't looked
I,
back through the history too hard, you're saying.
what mostly happens if someone writes a new article on quantum mechanics in the introductory physics classroom, we would just slap it onto the collection and put it in with the previous collection, so you'd know it'd be there.
Yeah.
Joe's
So
mentioned
AJP
books.
also had a special issue on quantum mechanics that was published mostly in January and a little bit in February, but we publish quantum mechanics papers all the time, so we don't actually collect those as special new things. I was thinking, the reason I've been looking away is I was trying to get up a safe login on PXP just so that I can show you what you're going to see or at least mostly what you're going to see. Okay, so I will try sharing that. Yeah, okay, I think we're at the right place. Okay. So this is like, it's a spare account of mine. So I think that we won't run into anyone's papers when we look at it. When you go to Peer Express, if you start on the AJP web page at the AAPT website, under submissions procedures, you'll see submit your manuscript. Click that button and it'll take you to here where you're going to be asked to log in. Your login name is your email address. And if you've forgotten your password, you can click on that button to reset it. And if you don't have an account, you can just create a new account. Okay, you won't have associate editor tasks. You might have reviewer tasks. General tasks is, if you have not done this before, this is where you modify your profile. So if you would like to be a reviewer, coming in and modifying your profile and saying what things you teach and what things you know about is a great way to become a reviewer. The other thing is just to email either me or Gary and tell us that you want to, and then we'll try hard to send you something more quickly, because there's a lot of randomness about when you come up in the database. All right, so author tasks is then where you want to go next. Just don't, the how to submit, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to get rid of it. It's not helpful. Go to just submit your manuscript. So read the how to submit on the AJP website at AAPT. All right. And so here we ask you a bunch of questions. Do please go ahead and read them, because, for example, I get papers all the time that have not reviewed the anonymous, not used double anonymous format, and yet they've had to check that box because you can't submit without it. Okay, so make your paper double anonymous. Read the editorial policies, or at the very least, come to a session like this one. The conflict of interest statement you can throw in. It's not a big deal. Probably none of you have a conflict of interest. And then you can choose the category. Probably it's a regular article. All right, continue. And so this is all looking pretty much like it looks at TPT also, Gary, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think there might be a different set of introductory questions that you have to answer. All right, so now you're going to upload your manuscript file. Heaven's sakes, where am I going to upload? I will find a paper that was recently accepted. Try not to pay too much attention to all my junk. There it is. Okay. All right, so we'll upload an accepted paper. Wait, am I in the right place? Oh, goodness, there we are. Okay. Excellent. Um, so upload the file, and then you have to say what kind of a file it is. So that would be the manuscript file, clean, not marked up, but we can talk about the other things while we're here. You can upload a cover letter. Usually you really don't need to, but if you have something to say, you're welcome to say it. That goes only to the editors, so it can have your name on it. Um, Integral multimedia, you can read about that on the webpage. Additional material for reviewer, that would be like, for example, since we do have double anonymous review, every once in a while, you need to refer to your own previous work, and there is no way to refer to it just as I'm following the pattern of Smith and all in what I do. It's just obvious from the particular project that it can be no one but yours. In that case, you would upload a copy of that work with your name removed from it so that reviewers would be able to read everything that you cite. You can't cite your own work and then say citation removed for anonymity. If you felt it was necessary to cite it, then the reviewers have to be able to read it. So that's rare, but you might use it. Supplemental online material, we talked about that. If you are like uploading, say, Python code, our system doesn't recognize Python code, so make it a zip file first and then upload the zip file. The rest of it you're not going to need. So select that it's the manuscript file. All right. And then I think we can move on. Next. Okay. All right, so this part's now it's much more straightforward after this. You'll get through it without any trouble. So you put in the title, the abstract. We try again to make sure that people do know what journal they're submitting to by asking them to say why it's appropriate for AJP. Any sentence will do here. And it's not a related manuscript, so don't worry about that. I don't know if it'll let me go next. Well, I have special powers. I'm the editor. Okay, then you put in the author information. If you have co-authors, you'll either be creating accounts for them or finding them. So if they have an account, you can enter their email address here and you might find them, and then you will have less information to enter. You agree that you're following all of the policies for authors. That is like, it's an accurate list. Can I say next? What I said next. Okay. What you can see is there's this sidebar here that's telling you if you've done everything you were supposed to. And I have these red X's telling me that I can't submit because I haven't put in a title or an abstract. Okay, you can choose one of the categories, and I'm sure TPT has all of its special categories also. You answer questions about conflict of interest and ethics and permission for publishing figures. By the way, figures are special. Text, if you're quoting someone's text, you can quote it and then you cite it and then you're all good. You cannot do the same thing with a picture. You can't copy a picture and then say what the source of it is and be all good. It has to be officially published on the web as freely available. And so otherwise you need permission or you need to draw it yourself. Okay, here's where you can choose open access or conventional publication. This is probably not as appropriate, but if you did the work with funding sources, then it's important to put them in here because then our journal does all the checking to see if there's any special requirements to the funding sources. Here's where you can suggest reviewers, but you're not required to. Lots of people get caught up here. They don't realize they have to approve the files. So you have to click on the file, open it up. You'll see that paper coming out soon. Then approve it. I think it's not quite done checking it yet, so that's why I can't approve it. But if I'd taken more time on the steps before now, I could approve it here, and then I think you just send it in and you're good. That was really quick, but hopefully helped a little bit. Did you have any questions before I go back to the regular screen? Okay. It's easy to go wrong, and we forgive you if you do. So just send an email and we'll fix these things for you.
Any other questions that come to your mind while we're here.
There's a question in the chat about explaining the co-author information process.
Okay, are you asking about like entering the information on your co-authors? Do they need to make an account? Not currently. They will be asked to enter their ORCID, their ID. Uh, That's a good idea, even if they happen to be undergrads. Ask them to go ahead and make up get an ORCID number, and then they'll have all the publications all organized in one place. It is not actually required for co-authors, but the emails that you get will make it seem like it's required, and it is a good idea. So when you enter their information, you'll put in their name, their email address, their institution, in
Can you
AJ.
say what an ORCID ID is, Beth?
Sorry?
Can you say what an ORCID ID
Oh,
is?
okay, sure, sure. I'll come back to that because I was just going to say you'll put in all their information. You'll say what there's a student, what level of degree they have so far, and then that actually creates an account for them, and they can come back later, log in, make a password for it, and put in any other information they wish to. ORCID stands for something. The ID at the end is ID. And what it is it's a centralized place to keep track of researchers because lots of people share the same name. So if you Google ORCID, you can scroll through all the flower stuff, but if you put in like ORCID publication or something like that, it will take you directly to the place where you can set up an ORCID account. There's really nothing to it. You don't have to be like qualified or anything. You just have to have a name and email address, and you get an ORCID account. So it's a way it keeps track of, especially like Asian names. Everyone has the name Lee. Sorry, Brian. And so you probably know that there's like probably about 500 Brian Lees publishing. And so that way we can keep track of which one's which, even as you move between institutions. I did mean to say about student research. AJP, I think 20 years ago, used to publish a lot of student research projects. We don't do that anymore. Again, your audience is your colleagues. Are they interested in this? Your particular colleagues at your particular institution may listen very politely to your student research talks and think, oh, that's really impressive, but you don't want to read anyone else's projects. So students can be co-authors, but it's because they were working on a project that has really intrinsic interest to physics instructors, not because they did a really nice research project. Were there more? Oh, there's good stuff about ORCID there. Terrific. It was going, so I want our process to change. So I would like to have it be required that co-authors have to go and edit their account and update it and approve the manuscript submission. But right now, that is not part of our process. They will get a couple of emails during the submission process, but they're never required to say that they received it and that they really are who they said they are. I see that we're sharing stuff, and Dave wanted to say something.
Folks, I'm going to put on one of my optics hats. I'm one of the people who co-directs the networking and mentoring part of optics. And one of the things we do is we build affinity groups. So you came here today because you were interested in publishing in one of these two articles. I'm going to toss my name into the chat. And if we want to get a group of folks together just to form a sort of a writing support group or maybe an accountability group, however you want to view it, I'd be willing to organize that. And then we just have a cohort of people working on whatever they're going to submit, giving each other support and encouragement. So if you're interested in being a part of a group that would be like that, just send me email, just dump it in the chat, and then we'll get something organized.
You're sharing your screen. Are you speaking, Tom?
Yes, this is just a feedback form that we would like you to fill out concerning this particular workshop. Uh, You can either do the URL or the CR code. And we can go back to regular folks to complete the workshop. But it's showing Chris now. And she's muted.
I'm eating and I was muted. So I just want to take a moment to thank Beth and Gary for a super informative session on how to publish in your respective journals. And thank you for letting us grab some of your Saturday. And thank you all for showing up. I'm going to stop the recording now.